Okay, so today we're gonna start with a square piece of paper, and if your piece of paper doesn't look square, you can fold one corner over to the other, and then you'll probably have like a little piece down here that you just need to cut off, okay? So we're gonna start with our square piece of paper. We're gonna fold one corner to the other, just kind of like we did, and we're gonna crease it. And then we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna open it back up, and I'm gonna fold this other corner, this bottom corner, up here to the other corner. And I'm gonna crease it. So what I'm gonna have is kind of like an X, and you can kind of see, it just looks like an X across my paper. So I'm gonna take each edge, each little edge, and I'm gonna fold it all the way in to the middle. And if you've ever made like a fortune teller, it's kind of like not what we're doing, but it looks like that. So we're just folding each corner into the middle, because each one of these is gonna be a vocabulary word and like an example that we're gonna use, okay? So at this point, you really don't have to, but if you wanted to, you can open it back up and you can kind of draw like an X across here, because it just might help you to stay lined up, right? I'm just really drawing kind of an X across this middle. So do you see how when I fold this down, this whole section will be this vocabulary word, right? Okay, so we're gonna start with the word ratio. And these words should be review for you. So we're gonna start with the word ratio. A ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. A comparison of two numbers by division, okay? So a ratio can also be written three ways. This should be review. These three ways should be review. So let's just do an example just to review. If we were in class, we would ask, what is the ratio of boys to girls in our class, right? And if we were actually in class right now, we would stop and we would count up the number of boys, we would count up the number of girls, and then we could write our ratios, okay? So let's just kind of pretend, let's say that there are 13 boys and 11 girls, okay? So if there are 13 boys and 11 girls, boys to girls, we're gonna list the boys first because order does matter, boys to girls. And one of the ways that we can write a ratio is just with the letters TO. So 13 to 11. Another way that we can write a ratio is with the colons, 13 to 11. And the way that you're gonna see the most in 7th grade, we're gonna write it as a fraction, 13 to 11. And I'm gonna put boys to girls because we're gonna always label the pieces of our ratios, right? So this one right here is primarily what you're gonna see. This right here, yes, we're writing it as a fraction. The 13 is on top. That is okay because we're not trying to change this to a mixed number. This is actually a ratio. So the 13 is how many boys we have and the 11 is how many girls. So we're just gonna leave it as 13 over 11, okay? I'm gonna close this flap and I'm gonna turn to the next section. The next section is gonna be proportion. A proportion is built of two equivalent ratios. Two equivalent ratios. And we just talked about how we can actually write a ratio, and the way that we're gonna see it most often was as a fraction. So really, a proportion is just two equivalent fractions. And that's what we're gonna really kind of see the most in 7th grade. So let's look at an example of a proportion, and then we'll look at something that's not a proportion. So example would be 5/9 equals 15/27. Okay, and let's talk about why, all right? So the reason that this is a proportion, 5 times what gives me 15? Well, 5 times 3 gives me 15. And if it's the same relationship on the bottom, then it is proportional. 9 times 3 is 27. So this is a proportion. Okay, let's talk about a non-example, because there's going to be some times where you have to decide if things are proportional or not. So a non-example would be 5/9 equals 10/27. So let's talk about that. 5 times 2 is 10. 9 times 3 is 27. Do they have the same relationship on the top and on the bottom? They do not. So this one would not be a proportion. Here's how we can check also. So let's say that you have some other things and you don't really know and you can't find the relationship, because we won't always be able to see these nice relationships like this. So there's another way that we can check every single proportion. So we can check it using cross multiplication. That means when I cross multiply, and you've probably heard that, in your previous grades, when I cross multiply, I should get the same exact equivalent number. So for instance, okay, I already know these in my head, so I'm not gonna do the multiplication on the side. 9 times 15 is 135. And if this is proportional, then 5 times 27 should also be 135. Which it is. Proportions make an equation that are equal on both sides. So I can check it with cross multiplication. In the same instance, if I do cross multiplication over here, we already said that 5 times 27 is 135, right? Well, if I cross multiply the other side, 9 times 10 is 90, and those are not equal. So this one would not be a proportion. So again, we can see the relationship, or we can cross multiply, which this cross multiplication is going to be really, really important. Okay, we're gonna use that a lot, especially tomorrow as we go into solving proportions when we have a missing piece. Okay, all right, let's go to rate. This unit has a lot of real-world examples, and so this is where you're gonna start to see some of those real-world examples, which is fun. A rate is a ratio, again, we're using the same words, a ratio that compares quantities measured in different units. So you guys can probably popcorn out and think in your head some different units that you can think about. But this is again where those real world examples, come into play. So, we have a track team here at our school. So in the spring, some kiddos will run track, and maybe they run 100 meters. We got a 100-meter dash, right? 100 meters in 15 seconds. Some of you guys are probably faster than that. Some of you guys may not be able to run it in 15 seconds, right? Or maybe they run a 400-meter dash, so 400 meters. And this would be really fast for a junior high kid in 1 minute and 2 seconds. So we have two quantities measured in different labels, meters and seconds. Another example, you guys drive places with your parents or your guardians or your grown-ups, 120 miles. Maybe you drive 120 miles in 2 hours, right? So you've got your quantities, 120 and 2, and they're measured in your different units. This is going to be a really big thing for us in this unit 3, and we'll do a lot with rate specifically. Let's talk about a very specific type of rate, and then we'll be done. So this next one is called a unit rate. A unit rate. And I want you to write this term, and it's going to sound really funny. It's called constant of proportionality. And really, it is a very, very fancy term for unit rate. So if you can remember constant of proportionality is just a fancy term for unit rate, that's going to help you. There actually is a formula for unit rate or for constant of proportionality, and it's y equals k over x. And we'll go into that a lot more in depth later, but right now we're just going to talk about what a unit rate is. A unit rate is a rate. Notice how all of these are building off of the previous vocabulary. A rate with a denominator of 1, right? So if you're talking about unit rate in elementary school, when you had a unit, you just had one tiny little block, right? That was your unit. So here's an example of what a unit rate in the real world would look like and what you might see within some of these questions. So let's say you go and get gas at the gas station and it's $2.53 per gallon. We know that per gallon means per 1 gallon, right? We talked about this when we did word problems because it doesn't say per 1 gallon, but we know that it means per 1 gallon, right? Same thing, if you see a sign that says 70 miles per hour, a speed limit sign, this is a unit rate. This is a constant of proportionality. So if you're driving and you share with your parent, hey, that's a unit rate, okay? Maybe you have, as a 7th grader, 7 classes per day. Because all of these things, per is gonna mean 1 hour, per is gonna mean per 1 day, right? So those are all unit rates. Per means 1 when we're talking about unit rate. Okay? All right, so if you want to close that all back up, you should have your foldable. Should kind of look something like this. We're going to utilize all of these things quite a bit. So here's what I'd really, really encourage you. This one, proportion, is going to be really important. So the way that we have our example and our non-example and cross and multiplying to check, that is going to be something that's so important with us during this unit, okay? Make sure you put this in your journal.